Okay, would you be okay if your team won fewer games and played more boring hockey in the regular season if you felt that gave you a better chance of winning the Stanley Cup? The Florida Panthers answered yes to that question, and they won back-to-back cups. Frankie, the Panthers were 11th in the regular season standings, and yet I think we all agreed they were the best team in the league this year. What can the other 31 teams learn from them?
Oh, there's a lot that other teams can learn, but there's two things that really come to mind as far as what the Florida Panthers did better and have done better than everyone else. What they did is they found undervalued talent around the league and they brought it into their organization. Someone like Sam Bennett, someone like Sam Reinhart, this year Seth Jones. You make these types of trades on players, and other teams could have made those trades, but the Florida Panthers decided to do it. And they hit home runs with all of those guys. So they found the undervalued talent that was sitting in the league that every other team had access to. This is not a team that was generally built through the draft. Only 3 guys that played prominent roles in this playoff run were drafted by the Florida Panthers. That's Barkov, Ekblad, and Lundell. Everyone else that had a prominent role was either a trade or a free agent signing. So they found the undervalued players that really work. The other thing, when it comes to the on-ice product, everyone was slotted perfectly. The defined roles of the Florida Panthers were perfect. And I kind of look at it this way. There's a top 9 and a fourth line that are league minimum guys that are replacement players every single year. But the top 9, there's not a lot of fluctuation within those line combinations. If you look at the Stanley Cup final, the Edmonton Oilers used 25 different line combos. The Florida Panthers used 8. You know what that tells me? Everyone was slotted perfectly, and you weren't asking players to do too much out of their comfort zone, and ultimately you could see the chemistry and the cohesion that group had leading to a Stanley Cup.
Frankie, the Panthers didn't have a single player making over $10 million this season. As comparison, the Oilers had 2, the Leafs had 3. Yet, in winning the Cup this year, Florida tied the NHL playoff record with 6 20-point players. Draisaitl admitted the Panthers' depth killed them. Every team wants a superstar, obviously, but does going too top-heavy at the expense of depth just cripple your team come playoff time?
It can, and we've seen that in the flat cap world where teams were hamstrung and they signed deals thinking that the cap was going to go up, and it didn't. And a lot of those teams that had players where they were forecasting, how much this player was going to make in comparison to percentage of the cap didn't go well because they didn't have the valuable players lower in the lineup. They had to ask players to do too much. And the Florida Panthers didn't have that. Now, if you go back a few years ago to the Panthers and their free agent quest for a goaltender, Sergei Bobrovsky at the time, a $10 million goalie, a lot of people looked at that and said, man, that's a lot for a goaltender. But you don't talk about that anymore because what has happened is the team in front of him was built perfectly. He played unbelievable hockey the last 3 years over these playoff runs, and that kind of stuff certainly gets masked. So it's not like the Florida Panthers were immune to having to spend a lot of money to acquire players. It's just that they did it with one guy that was a free agent, and then they made really shrewd trades along the way. And really, Gino, they've built a culture where now players are willing to take less to stay in Florida because of the culture of winning, of success, and of course all the frills that go with playing in a market like South Florida.
I love the fact you went there. Sometimes the GM's got to make ridiculously bold moves, have a lot of guts to do it. Bill Zito took over as GM in Florida 5 years ago. He rocked the organization by moving out 115-point scorer Jonathan Huberdeau and bringing in Matthew Tkachuk. 3 straight Cup finals, now back-to-back Cups. Tkachuk says they're a dynasty. Frankie, we've had 4 different franchises repeat since 1990. We can't have dynasties every couple of years, can we?
No, we can't have dynasties every single year or every few years. I think what has happened is, when the Pittsburgh Penguins went on their run, prior to that when the Chicago Blackhawks went on their run, and even to a certain extent the Los Angeles Kings, we started thinking, well, this is the modern day dynasty because we just don't see it the way we used to in the past because of the hard cap and the way teams have to roll over and change players, and there's so much turnover every single year. But the last team that really feels like it's at the point where the Florida Panthers are right now, on their way to being a dynasty, was the Tampa Bay Lightning. And I can't say that the Florida Panthers are truly a dynasty more than the other teams yet, because Tampa won 2 cups, they went to 3 finals. You know, the Chicago Blackhawks were the epitome of the modern day dynasty. The Pittsburgh Penguins back-to-back. So I would say if you're, you know, if we're getting to the point where we're calling the Florida Panthers a dynasty, they've got to make another finals here, and another Stanley Cup is going to have to come in the next year or 2 years in order to really say this is a dynasty, because we moved the goalpost in the last 15 years for what is considered a dynasty based on the realities of the hard cap world. But now we're seeing teams that once they find something and once they have a nucleus that knows how to win, it's tough to move them off of that. Pittsburgh went to back-to-back finals. The Tampa Bay Lightning went to 3 straight finals. The Florida Panthers just went to 3 straight finals. Edmonton just went to 2 straight finals. Maybe once you have your core, it's harder for teams to knock you off of going to the final than it is for those teams to make it back.
You know who's really made his mark? Paul Maurice. He's now joined the legendary Scotty Bowman as the only 2 coaches in NHL history with 800-plus wins and back-to-back Stanley Cups. So, Frankie, here's the question. Where does Paul Maurice now rank amongst the greatest coaches of all time?
Well, he is right up there. Like, if you want to call it top 5, I think that's fair to say based on how long he's been in the league, the wins that he's accumulated in the regular season, and now the success that he's had in the Florida. And I would say this, like, he's been blessed with a great team, but Paul Maurice fits what that team is all about. And you know, of course, you're going to talk about guys like Scotty Bowman and Joel Quenneville, and like there's been a lot of great coaches, Al Arbor along the way. But as far as what Paul Maurice has done here with this Panthers group, it's the envy of every team around the league right now. Yes, the way it was built, but the way they play on the ice. And I think it's important to separate the two, because you can build a team that on paper you think that's a Stanley Cup team. Like, there's a number of teams, if you look around the league this year, that you could say, I can build a compelling case for that team to be the Stanley Cup champs, whether it's the Dallas Stars or the Vegas Golden Knights, or, you know, maybe at times if you thought the Carolina Hurricanes were going to do it, the Edmonton Oilers, you know, but the Florida Panthers did it. And they've done it now 2 years in a row, and they've been to the finals 3 years in a row. And Paul Maurice has a big part in that, and he has to be considered one of the top 5 best coaches of all time.
All right, let's look ahead now, Frankie. The Panthers have 3 key pending UFAs, Bennett, Marchand, and Ekblad. Zito says he thinks he can re-sign all 3. To make that happen, to fit under the cap, all 3 would have to take less than they get there in the open market. Is Zito dreaming, or could you see that happening?
He's not dreaming, but it is somewhat wishful thinking to think that all 3 are going to come back. And that's largely based on the fact that Brad Marchand is going to have a boatload of money waiting for him as an unrestricted free agent. And really, he's not tied to Florida the way he was tied to the Boston Bruins. Now, when it comes to Sam Bennett and Aaron Ekblad, I would say it's more likely that 2 would be back than 3. And I wouldn't be surprised if it's just 1 that comes back. And the Florida Panthers have $19 million to spend next year, and they need to sign, 5 to 7 players on their roster. So it's not that it's impossible, but you are asking for discounts from guys. Ultimately, I would imagine Sam Bennett's contract is going to come in somewhere between the Carter Verhaeghe money at $7 million and the Sam Reinhart money at $8.6. Aaron Ekblad's the former first overall pick there. He's a lifer in Florida. The only thing that might worry you about Ekblad is that if you give him a significant bump up in money now, he's not a guy that plays 82 games a year for you. Can you find something similar? Because like I talked about earlier, they have found undervalued players elsewhere in order to fill the void on that team. And, last year is an example where they were able to walk away from Brandon Montour and no harm, no foul. They won a Stanley Cup again. So maybe there's a world where 2 guys would come back, and I think those 2 guys would be Bennett and Ekblad. But if I was putting money on it and there was only 1 guy coming back, it's probably Sam Bennett. Based on what we saw last year, the team prioritized the forward in Reinhart over the defenseman in Montour, and maybe that's something that happens again this year.
I'll tell you what, my friend, Zito's worked some miracles in the past. If he can pull this one off and get them all back, it's hard not to imagine the Panthers would have a serious shot at a three-peat.